He smirked when his quiet wife asked for nothing in the divorce because men like Julian Cross believe silence means surrender. But in a private Chicago boardroom beneath the cold glow of winter and 50 floors of glass, one signature was about to expose the lie beneath his entire empire. Maybe you know what it feels like to be underestimated, dismissed, or loved only when you make someone else feel powerful. Evelyn sat across from the man who had reduced her to a shadow while his lawyer stared at her real name and suddenly forgot how to breathe. This is not only a story about revenge, it is about hidden power, corrupted love, and the price of confusing kindness with weakness. Stay until the end, because the final truth changes everything. Like the video and comment where you are watching from. Before Dominic Hale saw the name beneath Evelyn's signature, before the blood drained from his face and Julian Cross forgot how to laugh, there had been another winter morning in Chicago. 4 years earlier, Evelyn stood behind the counter of a narrow coffee shop near the river, wiping steam from the glass, while snow gathered along the curb outside. The place was called St. Agnes Coffee, though there had never been a saint in its history. It occupied the first floor of an old brick building wedged between a tailor shop and a law office. The tables were small, the radiators clanged every 20 minutes, and the front door let in a sharp gust of cold whenever someone entered. Evelyn liked it that way. Nothing about the shop asked questions. Customers came in with wet coats and tired faces. They ordered coffee, complained about trains, read newspapers, and left without wondering why a woman with perfect posture and an education from 3 private institutions was working morning shifts for hourly wages. She wore a dark green apron over a white blouse. Her brown hair was tied loosely at the back of her neck. A pencil rested behind one ear, and a small silver ring hung from a chain beneath her collar. The ring had belonged to her grandmother. She never wore it on her hand. At 7:30 that morning, a man in a charcoal suit pushed through the door while speaking angrily into his phone. "No. Listen to me, Martin. The city does not care how much we already spent. They want the revised permits by Friday, and if we do not have them, the whole river project dies." He moved through the crowded shop as though the room belonged to him. His coat was dusted with snow. His dark hair was combed back, but the wind had disturbed it enough to reveal how carefully it was usually arranged. He was handsome in the way ambitious men often were before success hardened them. Not polished. Not yet, but close enough to make people believe he would be. Evelyn watched him approach the counter. "What can I get you?" The man held up one finger while listening to the voice on the phone. "No. Do not call the investors. I will handle the investors." Evelyn waited. The line behind him grew. A construction worker sighed loudly. The man ended the call, pressed the phone against his chest, and looked at her as though he had only just realized another person was standing there. "Coffee," he said. "What kind?" "The kind that makes zoning officials disappear. We stopped serving that after the last inspection." His mouth twitched. It was not quite a smile, but it was close. Black. Largest size. Name Julian. She wrote it on the cup. He noticed her handwriting. "You write like a school teacher. My parents are teachers. That explains the judgment. I charged you for coffee, not approval." This time he smiled. It changed his whole face. Evelyn turned toward the machine. Behind her, Julian answered another call. His voice lowered as he argued with someone about financing unpaid contractors and a meeting that had been moved without his consent. The espresso machine hissed. A delivery man bumped the counter. Evelyn reached for a carton of oat milk just as Julian leaned forward to take his cup. The carton slipped. A pale stream struck the front of his tie. The entire line went silent. Evelyn froze. The tie looked expensive from a distance, but up close she could see the frayed stitching near the knot. The silk had been carefully pressed. The label was famous. The wear along the edge was not. Julian stared down at the stain spreading across his chest. The construction worker behind him took one step back. Evelyn grabbed a towel. I am so sorry. Julian lifted the tie between two fingers. Then he laughed. It was quiet and surprised, as though the sound had escaped before he could stop it. Well, he said, now it looks as expensive as I told everyone it was. Evelyn looked at him. For a second, the arrogant man who had entered the shop disappeared. In his place stood someone younger, exhausted, and embarrassed by how badly he wanted the world to believe in him. She handed him the towel. You could take it off. And destroy the illusion. Is the illusion important? Julian wiped the milk from the silk. More important than most things. He took his coffee and left without asking for a refund. The next morning, he came back. He wore a different tie. Black coffee, Evelyn said. You remembered. You made the entire shop afraid to breathe. I have that effect on people. You had oat milk on your shirt. He leaned against the counter. Still counts. He returned the following day, then twice the week after that. Soon he began coming near closing time when the office workers had gone home and the lights from the river reflected against the windows. Sometimes he brought blueprints rolled beneath one arm. Sometimes he arrived without a coat because he had left it in a taxi during an argument. He always ordered black coffee. He never added sugar. You drink it like punishment, Evelyn told him one evening. Julian sat at the corner table while snow tapped softly against the glass. Coffee is not supposed to make you happy. It is supposed to keep you moving. Moving toward what? He looked down at the plans spread across the table. The drawing showed 3 glass towers rising near the river. My name on something no one can ignore. Evelyn pulled out the chair across from him. The shop had been empty for 20 minutes, but she had not locked the door. Why does everyone have to know your name? Julian studied her. Most people asked him how much the project was worth. They asked who the investors were, which politicians he knew, or whether he could get them into private clubs. Evelyn asked why. He looked back at the drawing. Because people do not step over names they recognize. There was something in his voice that made her stop smiling. Did someone step over yours? He folded the corner of the blueprint. I grew up in Bridgeport. That is not an answer. It is if you know Bridgeport. I know it. Then you know what it means to grow up counting every dollar. Evelyn said nothing. Julian continued. My mother cleaned hotel rooms. My father drank whatever money was left. When I was 10, the landlord shut off our heat in January. My mother boiled water on the stove and made me sleep in the kitchen. His eyes remained on the blueprint. There was a boy at school whose father owned half the block. He asked me why my coat smelled like cooking oil. Everybody laughed. The radiator knocked against the wall. Julian traced one of the towers with his finger. I decided nobody would ever laugh at me like that again. Evelyn saw the same boy in the man sitting across from her. She saw the hunger beneath the suit and the fear beneath the confidence. She also saw how tightly he held both. What happened to your father? He left. Julian said it too quickly. Evelyn did not press him. Outside, headlights moved across the wet street. A black sedan waited on the opposite curb. Julian glanced toward it. That car has been there for an hour. Chicago has traffic. The engine is running. Maybe the driver likes the heater. Julian looked at her curious. Evelyn stood and began collecting empty cups. The man in the sedan was named Gabriel Moretti. He had worked for her grandfather for 26 years. He carried a pistol beneath his coat, knew every alley between the river and Lakeshore Drive, and had been instructed never to let Evelyn walk home alone. Julian knew none of that. To him, she was Evelyn Hart, daughter of 2 teachers from Wisconsin. That was the name she had used when she enrolled at a public university after returning from Switzerland. It was not false. Hart had been her mother's name before marriage, and Evelyn's legal records were protected through family counsel. Her parents truly were teachers. They had spent most of Evelyn's childhood at a private boarding school near Lake Geneva, then later accepted positions in Switzerland. They had wanted distance from the Marcelli family, though distance was never the same as escape. Her grandfather, Carlo Marcelli, had built his fortune in the old Chicago way. Trucking, warehouses, construction, men who collected debts without paperwork. By the time Evelyn was born, the family had transformed much of its influence into legitimate companies. Marcelli Shipping controlled routes across the Great Lakes. Marcelli Security guarded banks, casinos, and private estates. Red Saint Capital issued loans to businesses traditional banks considered too dangerous. The old methods had not disappeared. They had learned to wear better suits. Evelyn had grown up inside guarded homes where every guest knew her last name before they knew the color of her eyes. Boys brought flowers to impress her grandfather. Men, twice her age, praised her intelligence while studying the value of her inheritance. At 23, she ended an engagement after discovering her fiancé had sent private messages to a banker about gaining access to Marcelli Capital. After that, she stopped using the name in public. She took the coffee shop job because she wanted to know how strangers behaved when there was nothing to gain from knowing her. Most people were ordinary. Some were kind. Julian was both at first. He began walking her home after closing. He never noticed Gabriel following half a block behind them. Julian talked about buildings the way other men talked about music. He pointed toward abandoned warehouses and described apartments filled with light. He saw possibility in broken brick, empty lots, and rusted bridges. Evelyn admired that. He did not inherit a company. He did not have a family name opening doors for him. He was building something with desperation nerve and an almost frightening belief in himself. One night they stopped beneath the elevated train tracks while snow drifted through the yellow streetlights. Julian reached for her hand. His palm was warm. "You never tell me what you want," he said. "I want to finish nursing school. You left. My grandfather became ill. You were close." "Yes." "Then go back." She looked at him. Most men who discovered she was studying nursing made some comment about doctor's blood or long shifts. Julian simply said she should return. "I will," she told him. When life is quieter." Julian smiled. "Life does not get quieter. You have to make people move out of your way." A train roared above them. He leaned down and kissed her. It was not gentle. It was not calculated either. For the first time in years, Evelyn kissed a man who did not know what her name could buy. Julian proposed 11 months later. He took her to the roof of an unfinished building near the river. The concrete was bare, the elevators were not operating, and they had to climb 14 flights of stairs. At the top, the city opened around them. The wind nearly tore the plans from his hands. Julian placed a simple diamond ring on her finger. "It is not the one you deserve," he said. "Not yet." Evelyn looked at the skyline. "What do I deserve?" "Everything." He believed it when he said it. That was why she said yes. Her parents met Julian twice before the wedding. Her mother liked his energy, but distrusted the way he watched wealthy people enter a room. Her father asked Evelyn whether Julian loved her or the person he imagined she might help him become. "He thinks I have nothing," Evelyn replied. Her father looked at her for a long time. "That does not answer the question." Carlo Marcelli refused to attend the ceremony. He sat in his library while Gabriel stood near the door. "The boy is hungry," Carlo said. "He works hard," Evelyn answered. "So do wolves. He loves me." Carlo poured 2 fingers of whiskey. "Then tell him your name." Evelyn looked toward the fire. "I want one thing in my life that does not begin with Marcelli." Her grandfather's face softened. "You cannot build love by hiding the foundation. I am not lying about who I am. You are hiding what the world believes you are. That is the only way to know what he believes." Carlo did not approve, but he did not stop her. The wedding took place in a small church on the north side. Julian's mother, Ruth, sat in the front pew wearing a blue dress she had altered herself. Evelyn's parents attended. Gabriel watched from the rear of the church. No Martelli cars lined the street. No politicians sent flowers. No photographers waited outside. Julian believed Evelyn had chosen simplicity because she had never known wealth. She let him believe it. Before the ceremony, Dominic Hale prepared the prenuptial agreement. Julian sat behind Dominic's desk, signing pages while answering business calls. "The sections concerning Mrs. Hart's family holdings are sealed," Dominic said. Julian barely looked up. "What holdings?" "Several trusts and private accounts. Teacher retirement funds." Dominic adjusted his glasses. The opposing counsel did not provide details. Julian signed the next page. "Then they cannot be worth discussing." Dominic hesitated. The attorney representing Evelyn was Miriam Vale, a woman whose firm represented banks, governors, and families whose names never appeared in court records. Dominic knew the name. He also knew better than to challenge sealed documents without instruction. Julian pushed the papers away. "She keeps what she brought in. I keep what I built. Simple. Nothing is simple when lawyers seal pages." Julian stood and buttoned his jacket. "She is not marrying me for money, Dominic." At the time, that was true. Their first year of marriage was happy. They rented an apartment with pipes that groaned in winter. Julian worked late. Evelyn cooked when he forgot to eat. On Sundays, they visited Ruth in Bridgeport. Julian repaired broken cabinet doors and replaced light fixtures while Evelyn drank tea with his mother. Ruth told stories about Julian as a child. How he slept with his shoes on because he feared eviction. How he once stole a library book about skyscrapers and returned it 6 months later with every building carefully copied into a notebook. Julian pretended to be embarrassed. Evelyn watched him smile. She loved him most in those rooms. No investors, no tailored suits, no audience. Then Julian's river project began to fail. A city inspection delayed construction. 2 private investors withdrew. Steel costs rose. The bank refused to extend the loan. Julian stopped sleeping. He paced the apartment at night, speaking into his phone in low, furious whispers. One evening, Evelyn found him sitting on the kitchen floor with his back against the cabinets. The lights were off. His tie lay beside him. A glass of whiskey rested untouched near his hand. She crouched in front of him. "What happened?" He stared at the opposite wall. "We miss one payment. The bank takes the site." "How much do you need?" Julian laughed without humor. $12 million. Evelyn sat beside him. He covered his face. "I was almost out." "Out of what?" He lowered his hands. "That life." His voice cracked. "I was almost far enough away that nobody could ever look at me and see where I came from." Evelyn touched his cheek. "I see where you came from. That is different. Why? Because you love me." She kissed his forehead. Julian leaned into her as though exhaustion had finally broken something open inside him. "I cannot lose this," he whispered. Evelyn held him until he fell asleep. The next morning she met Gabriel in the rear dining room of a private club owned by her family. Carlo Marcelli sat near the window. Age had reduced his body, but not his presence. His white hair was combed neatly back. A cane rested against his chair. "You want $12 million for the boy," he said. "I want to authorize a secured loan. You want to save him. I want to give him the chance he earned." Carlo looked at the documents. "Banks do not believe he earned it. Banks do not know him. Neither do you." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "I am his wife. That means you know how he sleeps. It does not mean you know what he becomes when he wins." She placed her hand on the table. "Red Saint can protect itself." Carlo studied her face. "You will not tell him no. He will believe he saved himself. He will believe someone invested in him." "You are someone." Not if he knows the name. Carlo signed the authorization. The loan was issued through Red Saint Capital. The agreement contained strict protections. Cross Urban Development pledged its shares. Future development fees, real estate holdings, and Julian's personal guarantees. A divorce petition fraud inquiry or major transfer of control could trigger immediate review and collection. Julian signed every page. He came home that night carrying champagne. "We did it," he said. Evelyn smiled and let him lift her into his arms. The company survived. Then it expanded. The River Towers opened 18 months later. The newspapers called Julian a visionary. Business magazines photographed him beside windows overlooking the city. The boy from Bridgeport became Julian Cross, the man who claimed he could see profit where others saw ruins. At first he still came home to Evelyn. Then he began coming home to the apartment. There was a difference. He bought a penthouse on the Gold Coast without consulting her. He hired an interior designer who replaced the furniture Evelyn had chosen. When she objected, Julian kissed her temple. "You will thank me when you stop living like a student." At dinners, he corrected the way she pronounced French wines. At charity events, he introduced her as the woman who had kept him grounded before success. People smiled at Evelyn as though she were an artifact from Julian's humble past. When she mentioned returning to nursing school, he looked up from his phone. "My wife is not going to empty bedpans. It is work I care about." "You do not need to work. I did not say I needed to." Julian returned to his messages. "You will get bored." She did not argue. The next week, a designer purse appeared in her closet. It cost more than the coffee shop paid her in a year. Evelyn carried her canvas bag instead. Julian noticed. "You are embarrassing me. It is a bag. It tells people you do not belong beside me." She looked at him. "I thought I was the reason I belonged beside you." Julian's face softened for 1 second. Then his phone rang. He left the room without answering her. Vanessa Cole entered their lives at a foundation dinner in River North. She wore a silver dress and laughed at every sentence Julian finished. Evelyn watched Vanessa touch his wrist beneath the table. Julian moved his hand away. That night he held Evelyn in bed and told her the woman was the daughter of a Texas oil executive. "She knows people we need." Evelyn stared into the darkness. "Does she know you are married?" Julian's breathing changed. "Everyone knows I am married." 3 months later, Evelyn found the designer purse missing from her closet. She saw it again in a photograph Vanessa posted from Miami. Julian stood beside her in the reflection of a hotel mirror. He had cropped himself from the image. His hand remained visible at Vanessa's waist. Evelyn did not confront him. She began watching. Late dinners became overnight meetings. Overnight meetings became weekends away. Julian locked his phone and changed the code to his office safe. He also stopped visiting Ruth. "She makes me feel guilty," he said. "For what?" "For leaving." "You did leave." Julian turned on her. "That is what people are supposed to do. They leave places that cannot give them anything." Evelyn looked at the man standing in their kitchen. For the first time, she could not find the man from the coffee shop inside him. The final break came on a gray morning in November. A courier delivered a foundation report requiring Evelyn's signature. The Cross Foundation had been created in her name. It funded shelters, school meals, and emergency housing. Evelyn opened the report. Her signature was already there. It looked almost perfect. Almost. She knew the pressure of her own hand. She knew the curve of the E and the space between her first and last names. This signature had been copied. She carried the report into Julian's study. His desk was locked. She used the small brass key he kept beneath a framed photograph of them. Inside, she found invoices from companies she had never heard of. Lake Mercury Consulting, North Bell Materials, Cedar Crown Logistics. Each invoice had been approved through the foundation. Each led to an account connected to Julian. One payment covered a private apartment leased under Vanessa's mother's name. Another paid a casino debt in Atlantic City. A third had been wired to a city inspector 3 days before the river project passed a safety review. Evelyn sat at Julian's desk until the room went dark. Then she called Gabriel. "I need Miriam Vale." There was a pause. Tonight. The forensic review took 6 weeks. Evelyn met accountants in private offices, parking garages, and once inside the closed coffee shop where she had first met Julian. The numbers told a story far colder than betrayal. $2 million missing from the foundation, false construction expenses, shell companies, bribes, company money used to maintain Vanessa's apartment and purchase jewelry, Evelyn's name forged on multiple approvals. Cross Urban Development pledged so deeply against the Red Saint loan that Julian no longer truly owned the life he displayed. Miriam placed the final file on the table. "You need to leave the marriage before this becomes public." Evelyn looked through the dark coffee shop window. Snow was falling again. What happens to him? That depends on what he does after the investigation begins. What happens to the employees? We can protect the company if Red Saint takes control quickly. And the foundation. The money can be restored. Evelyn closed the file. She returned to the penthouse after midnight. Julian was asleep. His phone rested on the nightstand. A message lit the screen. Vanessa had written that she was tired of waiting. Evelyn stood beside the bed and studied her husband's face. In sleep, he looked younger. The hard line between his eyebrows disappeared. His mouth relaxed. For one dangerous moment, she saw the man with oat milk on his tie. Then Julian turned away from her. The next morning, he asked for a divorce over breakfast. He did not sit down. He stood near the windows wearing a tailored gray suit while the city stretched beneath him. "This has not worked for a long time," he said. Evelyn folded her napkin. "How long?" Julian checked his watch. "Does it matter? It matters to me." He sighed. "You are a good person, Evelyn. But my life has changed. Our life. My career." She watched him carefully. "What does your career need that I cannot give you?" Julian looked toward the skyline. "Someone who understands the world I am in." Evelyn's voice remained quiet. "And Vanessa understands it." He turned. For the first time, surprise crossed his face. Then irritation replaced it. "You went through my phone number. Then you have been following me. I saw the purse." Julian's jaw tightened. He did not apologize. Instead, he walked to the counter and poured coffee. "You never used it." Evelyn almost smiled. That answer told her more than any confession could have. Julian lifted the cup. "I want this handled privately. Dominic will prepare everything. The prenuptial agreement is clear. What do you think I will ask for?" He looked relieved by the practical question. "I can give you enough to start over. You believe I need your permission to start over." Julian placed the cup down. "I am trying to be generous." Evelyn thought of the forged signatures resting in the locked drawer of her desk. She thought of the missing charity money. She thought of Red Saint Capital and $12 million Julian believed had arrived because men like him were destined to be rescued. "When do you want to sign?" she asked. Julian smiled. "Friday." Evelyn stood and carried her cup to the sink. Behind her, Julian began typing a message. She could see Vanessa's name reflected in the dark window. Evelyn washed the cup, dried her hands, and walked into the bedroom. From the bottom drawer of her dresser, she removed a thin black folder. Inside were the forged invoice, the forensic report, the Red Saint loan agreement, and the legal documents bearing the name Julian had never bothered to learn. Evelyn Rose Marcelli. She closed the folder and held it against her chest. In the living room, Julian laughed softly at something on his phone. Evelyn looked once at the wedding ring on her hand. Then she slipped the black folder into her canvas bag. By Friday afternoon, the black folder rested on the walnut table between them. Julian had not noticed it when Evelyn entered the conference room. He had been too busy checking his watch, answering Vanessa, and enjoying the certainty that the marriage would end exactly as he had arranged. Now the folder was open. The name at the bottom of the final page seemed to darken every other word around it. Evelyn Rose Marcelli. Julian read it once, then again. The letters did not change. He looked at Evelyn as though she had become someone else while he was blinking. Marcelli, he said. His voice sounded distant in the large room. Dominic Hale remained standing beside his chair. The old lawyer had represented politicians, developers, union officials, and men who never appeared in newspaper photographs. Julian had watched him sit calmly through federal raids, hostile negotiations, and threats spoken softly across expensive tables. He had never seen Dominic afraid. Not until now. Julian lifted the papers. This is some kind of legal trick. Evelyn did not answer immediately. She removed her wedding ring and placed it beside the torn check. The small sound of gold touching wood carried through the room. No trick, she said. Julian turned toward Dominic. Tell her this is fraud. Dominic looked at the signature, then at the embossed seal beneath it. It is not fraud. How would you know? Dominic swallowed. Because I recognized the seal. Julian stared at him. What seal? The Marcelli Family Trust. Outside the windows, snow moved sideways across Chicago. The city below had faded behind the storm, leaving only scattered lights and the faint outlines of towers. Julian looked back at Evelyn. You told me your name was Hart. It is my mother's family name. You told me your parents were teachers. They are. In Wisconsin. For several years. His face tightened. You said your grandfather was sick. He was. You said he owned a transportation company. He owned several. Julian pushed away from the table. The leather chair rolled backward and struck the wall. So every answer was designed to make me believe something that was not true. Evelyn's eyes remained steady. Every answer was true. You never asked beyond what you thought mattered. What was I supposed to ask whether your family ran half of Chicago? Dominic lowered his gaze. Evelyn noticed. So you do understand the name, she said. Julian laughed once, but no humor reached the sound. Everyone understands the name. The Marcelli family had not appeared openly in criminal court for nearly 20 years. Their legitimate holdings included shipping terminals, construction firms, private lenders, security companies, and several luxury hotels. Their less visible influence lived in old neighborhoods, private clubs, union halls, and offices, where powerful men lowered their voices before speaking. Julian had met people connected to them. He had shaken hands with city contractors who would not take calls during certain Sunday dinners. He had watched developers withdraw from projects without explanation after receiving invitations to private meetings. He had once joked that the Marcellis were a myth created to frighten businessmen who lacked courage. He was not joking now. The conference room doors opened. 2 men entered. Both wore dark coats over black suits. Snow melted along their shoulders. One was older, with silver at his temples and a scar running from his left ear toward his jaw. The other carried a narrow leather case. They did not announce themselves. They did not need to. Dominic straightened. The older man looked at Evelyn. Miss Marcelli. Julian turned sharply. You know her. The man's gaze moved toward him. There was nothing openly threatening in his expression. That made it worse. I know who she is. Evelyn gestured toward the empty chairs. Thank you, Gabriel. Miriam can take the seat beside Dominic. The younger figure removed her coat. Julian had assumed she was a man because of the severe black suit and close-cut hair. She placed the leather case on the table and opened it. Inside were several bound documents. Dominic recognized her. Miriam Vale. She gave him a small nod. Mr. Hale. Julian looked between them. You two know each other. Miriam sat down. We have worked on opposite sides of several matters. Dominic's discomfort deepened. Julian saw it. What matters Dominic did not answer. Evelyn returned to her chair. "Sit down, Julian." He looked at her. The request was quiet. Still, everyone in the room waited for him to obey. He remained standing for another second, then slowly returned to his seat. Evelyn placed both hands on the table. "You wanted a simple divorce. I still do. No, you wanted a public surrender. You wanted me to sit here, accept your check, and leave believing you had been generous. I offered you more than you brought into this marriage." Miriam opened one of the bound files. Dominic closed his eyes briefly. Evelyn looked at Julian. "That is the part you never understood." Julian leaned forward. "If your family has money, keep it. I do not want it. You already took it." His expression changed. "What are you talking about?" Evelyn nodded toward Miriam. A document slid across the table. Julian recognized the red symbol stamped in the corner, a saint beneath a rising sun. Red Saint Capital. His eyes moved to the first page. The $12 million bridge loan. He remembered the night he signed it. He remembered champagne in the apartment, Evelyn in his arms, the belief that the world had finally recognized what he deserved. He looked up slowly. "No." Evelyn said nothing. Julian turned the page. Red Saint Capital appeared at the top of every section. "The company is based in the Cayman Islands. It maintains an office there," Miriam said. "Its controlling interest is held through the Marcelli Family Trust." Julian's fingers tightened around the paper. "You expect me to believe your family funded my company?" Evelyn's voice remained calm. "I authorized the loan." The words entered the room and seemed to stop there. Julian stared at her. "You?" "Yes. You did not have authority to move that kind of money." Gabriel almost smiled. Julian noticed. What is funny, Gabriel's expression became blank again. "Nothing." Evelyn leaned back. "I became controlling beneficiary of the family trust 6 years ago. Red Saint answers to a board. I appoint the board." Julian looked at Dominic. "Did you know no? You reviewed the loan agreement. I reviewed the terms presented by Red Saint Council. You never investigated who owned it." Dominic's jaw tightened. "The ownership was protected through private entities." Julian struck the table with his palm. "That is your job." Miriam looked at him. "Your attorney advised you to conduct additional review. You signed before that review was completed." Julian pointed at her. "You were not there. I have the correspondence." She opened another file. Dominic's emails appeared on the first page. One warned Julian that the lender's ownership structure was unusually protected. Another recommended delaying the closing for 10 business days. Julian had replied from his phone. "Proceed. We need the money. Stop wasting time." He pushed the file away. "That loan saved the company." "Yes," Evelyn said. "You watched me fight for it. You watched me call every bank in the city. You watched me think we were going to lose everything. I watched you refuse to tell your wife how deeply the company was failing. You could have told me you had the money." And then, what Julian opened his mouth. No answer came quickly enough. Evelyn continued. "You would have loved me differently." "That is not true." "You would have measured every word against my family. Every apology would have become a negotiation. Every kindness would have carried a price. You do not know that. I know what happened when you believed I had nothing." Julian looked away. The city beyond the glass was nearly invisible now. "I built the company," he said. Evelyn's eyes moved toward the loan documents. "You built it with borrowed money. Every company uses debt. Not every man insults the person who kept the doors open." Julian pushed back from the table again. "You wanted gratitude. Is that what this is? I wanted honesty. You wanted to feel superior. A flash of pain crossed her face. It disappeared almost immediately. Julian saw it and pressed harder. You spent 4 years pretending to be helpless. You let me provide for you. You let me believe I was responsible for everything. I never asked you to provide for me. You lived in my home. The penthouse is pledged to Red Saint. He stopped. Miriam turned several pages in the loan agreement. Julian looked at Dominic. What does she mean? Dominic reached for the document with reluctant hands. He read in silence. His eyes moved faster with each paragraph. Julian's breathing grew louder. Read it. Dominic did not look up. Julian, read it. Dominic adjusted his glasses. The borrower pledged all direct and beneficial interest in Cross Urban Development, the Gold Coast residence, the Lake Geneva property listed vehicles, future development fees, and personal guarantees connected to operating revenue. Julian stared at him. That was collateral against default. Yes, we never defaulted, Miriam spoke. The company has been in technical default for 11 months. Julian looked at her. That is impossible. Cross Urban Development violated its reporting obligations. Several financial statements included false expenses and concealed transfers. Dominic closed the document. Julian turned on him. You said the reports were compliant. I reviewed what your finance department provided. You signed them. I signed legal disclosures based on representations from management. You are management's counsel, and you are management. The words landed harder than Dominic intended. Julian's eyes narrowed. Dominic looked away. Evelyn watched both men. For years, Julian had surrounded himself with people who softened consequences before they reached him. Dominic had translated risk into manageable language. Owen had moved numbers. Assistants had corrected schedules, arranged apologies, and carried the weight of Julian's carelessness. Now there was no one left to make the truth sound smaller. Julian picked up the loan agreement. You cannot call the loan because of a divorce. Miriam turned to the relevant section. A petition for dissolution of marriage involving the personal guarantor constitutes a material change in control and triggers immediate review. Review is not collection. Fraud changes that. Julian looked at Evelyn. You planned this. I prepared for it. You waited for me to file. You asked for the divorce. Because the marriage was over. The marriage was over long before you admitted it. Julian's face hardened. You could have filed first. I needed time to understand what you had done. His eyes flickered. What do you think I did? Miriam placed a second document beside the loan. A formal notice of default. Julian did not touch it. Evelyn spoke carefully. The company submitted false invoices. Foundation funds were moved through shell accounts. My signature appeared on approvals I did not sign. Julian's mouth tightened. This is not the place. It became the place when you tried to pay me with money taken from the foundation. The torn pieces of the check remained on the table. Julian glanced at them. For the first time, the insult he had intended seemed to turn back toward him. You are accusing me of theft in front of my attorney. Dominic looked at the files. I think she is documenting it. Julian stood again. Enough. Gabriel shifted slightly near the door. Julian saw the movement. What is he here for? To make sure no one loses control? Evelyn said. Julian gave her a bitter smile. You think I am afraid of him? Gabriel remained silent. Julian's voice rose. You bring 2 people into a legal meeting, reveal some old family name, and expect everyone to kneel. Evelyn looked at him. No one asked you to kneel. That is what your family does. You make men afraid, then call it respect. My family has done many things I do not defend. Yet you use the name when it benefits you. I used my name today because you demanded the truth in writing." Julian grabbed the divorce papers. This marriage was built on a lie. Evelyn's expression finally shifted. Not anger. Grief. "The marriage was built on what we did when neither of us had an audience." He looked at her. She continued. "You knew the way I took my coffee. You knew I hated rooms without windows. You knew I called your mother every Sunday after you stopped visiting. You knew I wanted to finish nursing school. You knew I cried when the shelter opened its second building." Her voice lowered. "You knew me." Julian looked down at the table. "You hid the most important thing." "No. I hid the thing that became most important to you." For several seconds, no one spoke. Snow struck the glass in soft bursts. Julian's phone lit up. Vanessa again. "Is it done yet?" The message remained visible. Evelyn saw it. Julian turned the phone face down. "Too late." He softened his voice. "Evie." The name sounded intimate in the silent room. Evelyn's fingers curled once against the table. Julian noticed. He moved around the corner of the table toward her. Gabriel stepped forward. Evelyn raised one hand. Gabriel stopped. Julian came closer. "This is a lot to understand." She looked up at him. "You had 4 years. I had 4 years with a woman who was not honest about who she was. And I had 4 years with a man who became honest only when he thought honesty had no cost." He crouched beside her chair. The position made him appear vulnerable. It was calculated but not entirely false. "There is still a way through this." Evelyn's eyes searched his face. Julian leaned closer. "Cross and Marcelli together. Think about it. The developments, the ports, the city contracts. We could rebuild everything under one structure." Evelyn stared at him. "You are discussing a merger." "I am discussing our marriage." "No. You are discussing access. That is not fair. Would you be asking me to stay if that paper said Evelyn Hart?" Julian hesitated. It lasted less than a second. It was enough. Evelyn looked away. Julian reached for her hand. She withdrew it before he could touch her. "Evelyn, I loved you. You loved the distance between us. What does that mean? You needed me beneath you." His jaw tightened. "That is not true. You called me simple when I disagreed with you. You called me ungrateful when I wanted work of my own. You gave away my belongings because I would not display the life you bought. It was a purse. It was never about the purse." Julian stood. His vulnerability disappeared. "You are enjoying this." Evelyn looked at him. "I am ending it." Miriam placed a pen beside the divorce agreement. "The waiver remains unchanged. Miss Marcelli seeks no marital property, no support, and no share of Mr. Cross's personal assets." Julian laughed bitterly. What generosity. Evelyn picked up the cashier's check he had offered her. "You wanted me to take this so you could remember yourself as kind." She tore the check once. The paper separated cleanly. Then she tore it again. The pieces fell beside the wedding ring. "I do not want your money." Julian's eyes followed the falling paper. Evelyn stood. "But Red Saint will recover its money." Miriam slid the default notice toward him. Julian did not look at it. "How much time?" "The notice is effective immediately. You cannot seize a company immediately. The court approved the emergency receivership this morning." Dominic stared at Miriam. "You filed before this meeting. We filed after Mr. Cross's petition was entered into the court system." Julian turned toward Dominic. "Stop it." Dominic remained still. "File an injunction. Challenge the receivership. Argue improper notice." Miriam answered before Dominic could. The fraud evidence was submitted under seal. Julian's face changed. What evidence? Evelyn picked up the black folder. Enough. He stepped toward her. Gabriel moved between them. Julian stopped. The older man did not touch him. He did not speak. He simply stood there, one hand resting near the front of his coat. Evelyn walked toward the doors. Julian called after her. "You think your name makes you untouchable?" She paused. "No." She turned to face him. "It taught me how quickly power turns people into strangers." Julian's voice cracked with anger. "I built everything you saw." Evelyn looked around the room, then toward the storm beyond the windows. "You built an image. It was real. Then it should survive the truth." She opened the door. Julian took one step forward. "Evelyn." She looked back. For the first time that afternoon, her eyes were wet. "I believed in you before the city did." The anger left his face. Evelyn held his gaze. "That was the most expensive mistake I ever made." She walked out with Gabriel and Miriam. The doors closed. The room became silent again. Dominic slowly sat down. Julian remained standing. His phone began to ring. "Owen Price." Julian answered. What noise flooded the line? Voices, elevator alarms, someone shouting in the background. Julian Owen said there are court officers in the lobby. Julian looked at Dominic. "What are they doing?" "They have a receivership order. Red Saint called the loan. The board suspended your authority. I am the board." "Not anymore." Julian gripped the phone. "Move the operating cash." "I cannot. Move it before they freeze the accounts." "They already did." Julian's breathing became shallow. "Use the reserve account. That account is under review." "By whom?" Owen lowered his voice. "Federal investigators." Julian looked toward the closed doors. "What did Evelyn give them? I do not know. They are asking about the foundation, the construction vendors, and the payments to city inspectors." Dominic began gathering his papers. Julian saw him. "Where are you going?" Dominic placed the files inside his briefcase. "I need to contact Ethics Council. You need to protect me." Dominic closed the case. "My firm represents Marcelli Shipping in 3 active matters." Julian stared at him. "You knew." "I knew the firm represented related companies. I did not know your wife controlled them. You are my lawyer. There is now a conflict. You do not get to discover a conflict after 4 years." Dominic stood. "I discovered it when I read her name." Julian moved in front of him. "You walk out that door, I will destroy you." Dominic looked at the man he had protected for nearly a decade. Then he looked at the default notice on the table. "I do not think you are in a position to destroy anyone." He walked around Julian. At the door he stopped. "Do not move money. Do not delete messages. Do not contact anyone connected to the foundation." Julian's voice dropped. "Are you advising me I am trying to keep you from making the next hour worse?" Dominic left. Julian stood alone. His phone vibrated again. A banking notification appeared. Access restricted. Another followed. Corporate card suspended. Then a third. Personal credit review initiated. Julian walked toward the windows. Chicago had vanished behind the snow. His reflection remained in the glass. Perfect suit, perfect hair, gold cufflinks. A man who looked exactly as powerful as he had 1 hour earlier. Behind him, the torn check rested beside the wedding ring. His phone rang once more. This time, Vanessa's name filled the screen. Julian stared at it. Then the conference room lights dimmed automatically, leaving him suspended between his reflection and the city he could no longer see. Vanessa's name continued to glow across Julian's phone. For several seconds he watched it ring without answering. The conference room had grown darker around him. The automatic lights had dimmed, leaving only the gray storm beyond the windows and the cold reflection of a man who still looked wealthy. His suit still fit perfectly. His shoes were still handmade in Italy. His cufflinks still carried his initials. Nothing visible had changed. That was the lie his reflection offered him. The phone stopped ringing. A message appeared. "Are we celebrating or not?" Julian locked the screen. He returned to the table and picked up the default notice. The words seemed deliberately complicated, designed to frighten people without power. Immediate enforcement. Appointment of receiver. Suspension of management authority. Preservation of records. He read the first page twice, then folded the notice and slipped it inside his coat. He left the torn check behind. He did not touch the wedding ring. The hallway outside the conference room was empty. Thick carpet absorbed the sound of his steps as he moved toward the elevators. At the reception desk, a young woman looked up. She had greeted him by name when he arrived. Now her eyes moved toward the closed conference room doors, then back to him. "Mr. Cross." Julian pressed the elevator button. "Call my driver." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. "I believe your vehicle is already downstairs. Then tell him I am coming." The elevator arrived. Julian stepped inside before she could answer. The mirrored walls reflected him from every angle. He adjusted his tie and smoothed his hair. His hand was steady now. Panic was for people who had no options. He had options. He had relationships. He had spent years collecting favors from bankers, city officials, contractors, and investors. Men who had made fortunes beside him would not allow one private lender to dismantle an empire in a single afternoon. The elevator descended. Julian called Owen. The line connected immediately. "Tell me where you are." Owen's breathing was loud. "I am in the main lobby. Why security removed us from the executive floor?" Julian pressed his jaw tight. "Who gave them authority?" "The receiver. There is no receiver until a hearing. They have an emergency order. Then challenge it. I am the chief financial officer, Julian. I am not your attorney. You are whatever I pay you to be." Silence followed. In the background, someone called Owen's name. Julian continued. "Move the reserves into the North Bell account. I already told you the accounts are frozen. Then use the private credit facility. That was suspended 10 minutes ago. Call First Chicago. They are the ones who suspended it." The elevator passed the 30th floor. Julian watched the numbers fall. "Who have you spoken to Red Saint's accountants?" "The receiver. 2 federal agents." Julian's eyes narrowed. "What did you tell them?" "The truth." The words struck harder than shouting. Julian gripped the phone. "You should think very carefully before you say that again." Owen lowered his voice. "I have thought about it every night for 2 years. You signed the reports. I signed what you ordered me to sign. No one ordered you to do anything. You threatened to replace me. That is not an order. It is when you control a man's salary insurance and mortgage." The elevator reached the 20th floor. Julian's face burned. "You are trying to save yourself." "Yes." Owen said it without hesitation. "For once, yes." The line went dead. Julian stared at the screen. He called back. Owen did not answer. He called Dominic. The call went to voicemail. He called the president of First Chicago Bank. No answer. He called a state senator who had attended his birthday dinner 2 weeks earlier. The senator's assistant picked up. Senator Bell's office. "It is Julian Cross." A pause. "Mr. Cross." "Put him on. The senator is in committee. Tell him it is urgent." "I am afraid he cannot take your call. He took my call during his daughter's wedding." Another pause. "Mr. Cross, we have been instructed to direct any future communication through counsel." Julian stopped breathing for 1 second. "By whom I cannot discuss that." The line disconnected. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Noise rushed toward him. People crowded near the security desk. Employees from Cross Urban Development stood with boxes in their arms. Assistants whispered into phones. Two uniformed court officers spoke with building management. At the far end of the lobby, 3 men in dark suits stood beside the elevators leading to the executive offices. One of them wore a red saint pin on his lapel. Julian stepped out. Several employees saw him. The whispering stopped. He moved through the crowd with his shoulders back. "Where is Owen?" No one answered. A junior analyst looked down at the floor. Julian pointed at him. "You. Where is Mr. Price?" The analyst swallowed. "He left through the south entrance. Get him back. I do not work for Cross anymore." Julian stared at him. The young man held a cardboard box against his chest. A framed photograph of 2 children rested on top. "You worked for me this morning." The receiver terminated the executive reporting structure. "You do not know what those words mean." The analyst looked toward the security desk. Julian stepped closer. "I gave you your first job. You forgot my name for 3 years." Julian's expression hardened. The analyst turned and walked away. A court officer approached. "Mr. Cross." Julian recognized him from the law office documents. "You are trespassing. This building houses my company. The company is under court supervision. I own the company. The receiver currently controls access." Julian reached inside his coat and removed his executive keycard. He held it against the private elevator panel. The light flashed red. He tried again. Red. The court officer watched without expression. Julian lowered the card. "My personal office contains privileged materials. Those materials are being preserved. My laptop is upstairs. It has been secured. My files. Secured." Julian looked at the employees around him. Some stared openly. Others pretended not to watch. He recognized people whose weddings he had ignored, whose promotions he had delayed, whose weekends he had taken without apology. He saw no sympathy in their faces. Only distance. A woman from accounting lifted her phone. Julian pointed at her. "Do not record me." She lowered it, but the man beside her did not. Julian moved toward the front doors. His driver was not waiting inside. The doorman, Eddie, stood beneath the brass entrance canopy. For 5 years, Eddie had opened Julian's car door every morning. Julian had never learned whether Eddie had children. "Where is Marcus?" Eddie looked toward the curb. "Your driver left Mr. Cross. Y Company instructed him to return the keys." Julian pushed through the revolving door. The wind struck him immediately. Snow had turned to hard grains of ice that bounced across the sidewalk. His black Bentley sat near the curb. A flatbed truck was positioned in front of it. A man in a blue work jacket fastened a cable beneath the front bumper. Julian stopped. For a moment, the scene did not make sense. Then he crossed the sidewalk. "What are you doing?" The driver looked up. "Repossession. Remove that cable." The man returned to his work. Julian grabbed his shoulder. "I said remove it." The driver straightened. He was broad with a gray beard and grease beneath his fingernails. "Take your hand off me. This vehicle belongs to Cross Urban Development." "Correct. I am Cross Urban Development." "Not according to the order." He handed Julian a clipboard. The red saint emblem appeared at the top of the page. Julian did not read the rest. "This is invalid. Call the number at the bottom. You call it. I am not the one losing a car." A few pedestrians had stopped beneath nearby awnings. One man lifted his phone and began recording. Julian reached for the Bentley's rear door. Locked. He pressed the key fob. Nothing happened. He pressed it again. The lights did not flash. "Remote lockout," the driver said. "My briefcase is inside." "Not my problem. My computer is in the back seat." "Then you should have removed it before the order." Julian struck the window with the side of his fist. The glass did not move. The driver returned to the controls. The cable tightened. The Bentley rolled forward, then slowly climbed onto the flatbed. Julian watched the front wheels leave the pavement. His reflection stretched across the black door. The man recording stepped closer. "Mr. Cross, any comment on the federal investigation?" Julian turned. The speaker was not a reporter. He was a university student in a winter coat, smiling behind his phone. Julian walked toward him. "Turn that off." The student backed away. "People are already sharing it." "Sharing what?" "The raid." "There was no raid." "My friend works in your building." Julian reached for the phone. The student pulled it back. Eddie stepped between them. "That is enough, Mr. Cross." Julian looked at the doorman. "You are speaking to me like that." Eddie met his eyes. "I am keeping you from making this worse." Julian almost laughed. Everyone had learned that sentence today. He looked toward the Bentley. The flatbed pulled into traffic. Snow swallowed its taillights. Julian stood on the curb with his phone in one hand and the useless key fob in the other. His banking app sent another notification. Checking access restricted. He opened a second account. Unavailable. He tried a corporate card. Suspended. He called his private banker. Voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. A text arrived from an unknown number. "Mr. Cross, all communications regarding account activity must proceed through legal counsel." Julian looked up at the Gold Coast Tower. From the street, the building appeared unchanged. Somewhere above him, strangers were opening his drawers, reading his emails, and examining the life he had believed no one could take. His phone rang. Vanessa. This time he answered. "Where are you?" she asked. Music played behind her. "The office. You said you would be here 20 minutes ago. There has been a complication." "What kind?" Julian looked at the empty space where the Bentley had been. "A temporary legal issue." Vanessa sighed. "The champagne is getting warm. I am coming. Are you bringing the car?" He closed his eyes. "I said I am coming." He ended the call. The restaurant was 12 blocks away. Normally, Julian would have called another driver. He opened the ride service app. Payment declined. He tried a second card. Declined. A third. Declined. The price on the screen rose as snow thickened. Julian looked at the sidewalk. Then he began to walk. The wind came off the river like a blade. Snow collected on the shoulders of his coat and melted against the wool. His shoes slipped on dark patches of ice. He passed boutiques where salespeople knew his size. He passed the private club where men once stood when he entered the room. Through the glass, he saw two investors seated near the fire. One noticed him. The man leaned toward his companion and said something. Neither came outside. Julian walked faster. His phone vibrated constantly. News alerts. Cross Urban Development placed under emergency receivership. Federal authorities review charity accounts linked to developer Julian Cross. Video shows Cross vehicle seized outside Gold Coast offices. He turned off the screen. At the corner of Wabash and Hubbard, a bus sent gray slush across his trousers. Julian cursed and stepped back. A woman under an umbrella recognized him. Her eyes widened. He crossed the street before she could speak. By the time he reached the restaurant, his chest burned from the cold. The entrance glowed beneath a black canopy. Inside, amber light reflected from crystal glasses and polished brass. The place smelled of wine butter and expensive restraint. The maitre d' Henri stood behind a narrow desk. He had greeted Julian for years with a bow. Tonight he looked at Julian's wet coat and reddened face before offering a careful smile. "Mr. Cross, I have a reservation." "Yes." Henri did not move. Julian glanced toward the dining room. Vanessa sat at their usual table near a velvet curtain. She wore a red silk dress. Her blonde hair fell over one shoulder. A silver bucket of champagne rested beside her. She was looking at her phone. Julian stepped forward. Henri placed one hand against the reservation book. "There is a matter concerning the deposit. Handle it tomorrow." The card was declined. "It is a bank error. We attempted it 3 times. Julian lowered his voice. "You know me." Henri's eyes moved toward the wet marks on Julian's shoes. "I do." "Then put it on my account." "We do not maintain accounts. You have made exceptions before. Not under these circumstances." Julian leaned closer. "What circumstances?" Henri said nothing. The silence answered. Julian felt people moving behind him entering from the storm. He could feel their eyes on his back. He reached beneath his sleeve and removed his watch. It was heavy gold and nearly perfect. He placed it on the desk. "Hold this." Henri looked down. A Patek Philippe worth more than tonight's service. Henri lifted the watch. He examined the face, the crown, and the clasp. Julian shifted impatiently. "Are we done?" Henri turned the watch over. His expression changed. Not surprise, disappointment. "This is not authentic." Julian's face became hot. "Of course it is." Henri touched a small engraving with one fingernail. "The serial placement is incorrect. The movement is wrong. You are a waiter." Henri set the watch down. "I am a collector." Julian looked toward the dining room. Vanessa had seen the exchange. She sat very still. Henri pushed the watch back across the desk. "I cannot accept this." Julian slipped it into his pocket. "It is a temporary problem. Let me speak to my guest." Henri hesitated. Then he stepped aside. Julian walked through the dining room. Conversation softened as he passed. Vanessa watched him approach. Her eyes moved from his wet hair to the slush on his trousers. "You walked here." He pulled out the chair and sat. "There was traffic. You look like you fell into the river." Julian reached for the champagne. Vanessa moved the bottle away. "What happened? I told you." "A legal issue." "What legal issue gets your card declined?" Julian looked around the room. "Keep your voice down." She leaned closer. "Did Evelyn refuse to sign no? Did she ask for the penthouse? No. The lake house number? Then why do you look like this?" Julian took a slow breath. She signed. Vanessa waited. He looked at her. "She is not Evelyn Hart." Her expression did not change. "What does that mean? Her real name is Marcelli." Vanessa blinked. Then she laughed softly. Julian did not. Her smile faded. "You are serious. She controls Red Saint Capital." "The lender." "Yes." Vanessa set down her glass. "What did she do?" "She called the loan. And the company is under receivership." Her face emptied. "The penthouse pledged. The lake house pledged. The Bentley. They took it." Vanessa stared at him. Julian reached across the table. "This is temporary." She looked at his hand but did not take it. "I can fight it. With what I have people. Your people are not answering, are they?" Julian's jaw tightened. Vanessa leaned back. "What about the Bahamas?" He stared at her. "What? The trip?" "I just told you I lost the company, and I am asking whether that changes the trip." Julian lowered his voice. "There is no trip." Vanessa looked toward the champagne. For several seconds she said nothing. Then she gave a small nod as though confirming something privately. Julian reached for her hand again. "We can go somewhere else later." She withdrew before he touched her. Yes." Vanessa looked almost confused. "You think I am going with you? I love you." She studied his face. "No. You loved arriving with me. That is not true. You loved men looking at my dress. You loved women recognizing the jewelry you bought. I left my wife for you. You left your wife because you believed I made you look successful." Julian's voice sharpened. "You said you loved me. I loved the version of you who had a driver waiting outside." He stared at her. Vanessa picked up her champagne. "My father is not in oil. What he owns 6 gas stations outside Dallas." Julian blinked. "You told me he ran an energy company. That sounds better. You lied." She gave him a tired smile. "You never asked a second question." Julian sat back. The echo of Evelyn's voice moved through him. "You never asked beyond what you thought mattered." Vanessa reached for her purse. "The diamond ring is gone." His eyes narrowed. "What do you mean I sold it this morning?" You sold my ring? You gave it to me. I gave it to the woman I was going to marry. Vanessa stood. You were never going to marry me. You were going to display me. Julian grabbed her wrist. She looked down at his hand. Let go. You cannot leave me here. Her eyes lifted to his. There was no affection in them now, only impatience. Watch me. He released her. Vanessa leaned down and kissed his cheek. Her lips were cold. It was fun being chosen by a powerful man. She looked toward the entrance where Henri stood beside the reservation desk. But you are not that man anymore. She walked away. Julian remained at the table. The champagne bucket stood between two empty chairs. Henri approached with two security guards. Mr. Cross. Julian looked at the untouched place setting. I need a minute. I am afraid you need to leave. Julian stood. I have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars here. Henri's expression remained polite. Not tonight. The guards escorted him through the dining room. No one looked directly at him. That was worse than staring. Outside, the storm had become freezing rain. Julian stumbled onto the sidewalk. The restaurant door closed behind him. He turned and struck the glass with his palm. Open the door. Henri walked away. Julian stood beneath the awning, breathing hard. Water ran from his hair into his collar. Traffic moved along the shining street. Then a black armored sedan slowed near the curb. Julian recognized it. The vehicle had once belonged to his executive fleet. He stepped into the street and pounded on the rear window. Open this door. The car stopped. The tinted glass lowered. Evelyn sat inside beneath a soft interior light. She wore a dark navy coat. Her hair rested loose across her shoulders. A silver Marcelli ring gleamed on her hand. She looked at Julian without anger, without pleasure, without fear. He gripped the door handle. Let me in. For a long moment, she said nothing. The lock clicked. Julian pulled the door open and climbed inside before Evelyn could change her mind. Warm air rushed over him. It carried the faint scent of leather cedar and the perfume Evelyn used to wear only on winter evenings. The contrast between the heated car and the freezing street made his skin ache. He dropped onto the seat across from her. Rainwater ran from his coat onto the black leather. Evelyn looked down. Do not touch the upholstery. Julian stared at her. What? You are soaking wet. For one strange second, he almost laughed. The car had once belonged to his executive fleet. He had chosen the leather, the tinted glass, and the soft gold lighting himself. He had sat in this same seat while assistants read him schedules and drivers carried him through traffic. Now Evelyn sat where he used to sit. He remained at the edge of the seat like a man waiting for permission. The door closed behind him. Chicago disappeared behind smoked glass. Gabriel sat in the front passenger seat. Another man drove his hands steady on the wheel. Neither turned around. Julian looked at Evelyn. The woman before him wore a dark navy coat over a black silk blouse. Her hair was loose, falling over one shoulder. The silver Marcelli ring rested against the tablet in her lap. She looked nothing like the quiet wife he had left at the breakfast table. That thought angered him because it was not true. She had the same green eyes, the same controlled voice, the same way of watching before she spoke. The difference was that Julian could no longer mistake restraint for weakness. He wiped water from his face. You planned that. Evelyn's expression did not change. The restaurant, all of it. She placed the tablet beside her. You think I arranged for Vanessa to leave you? You took the company. You froze my accounts. You took the car. Red Saint enforced a contract. You own Red Saint. I control it. That is the same thing. No. Ownership comes with responsibility. You never understood that. Julian leaned back, then remembered the wet coat and moved forward again. The humiliation sharpened his voice. You wanted to see me like this." Evelyn looked at the water dripping from his sleeve. "No." "Then why are you here?" "I was returning a vehicle to the new company office." "You expect me to believe this was an accident. I knew where you had dinner reservations. I did not know whether you would still be able to enter." Julian studied her face. There was no smile. That made his anger worse. He had expected triumph, cruelty, something he could fight. Evelyn only looked tired. The sedan moved away from the curb. Julian glanced through the rear window. The restaurant lights disappeared behind the rain. "Take me to the penthouse." Evelyn looked at him. "You no longer have access. My clothes are there. They are being inventoried. My passport, secured. My personal documents, secured. That is my home. It is collateral." Julian struck the seat with his palm. Gabriel turned slightly. Evelyn lifted one finger. Gabriel faced forward again. Julian noticed the exchange. "You have him trained well." Evelyn's eyes hardened. "Gabriel has protected my family since before I could walk. Speak to him with respect." Julian let out a breath. There she is. Who the real Evelyn? She watched him. "You believe power changed me because you never recognized it when it was quiet." He looked away. Rain crossed the windows in silver lines. Beyond them, the city lights smeared into gold and red. Julian saw his reflection in the glass. Wet hair, pale face, a ruined suit. No car waiting, no assistant calling, no room opening when he entered. He turned back toward Evelyn. "You could have told me. We already had this conversation." "No. In that room, you performed for your lawyers. And now it is only us." Evelyn looked toward Gabriel. "It has never been only us." Julian lowered his voice. "Ask them to stop the car." "Why?" "Because I am not having this conversation in front of them." Gabriel spoke without turning. "You had private conversations with your mistress in front of drivers for 2 years. Julian's face tightened. Evelyn looked at Gabriel. "That is enough." The older man fell silent. Julian stared at the back of his head. "You knew." Gabriel did not answer. "You followed me." Evelyn spoke. "My security team documented anything that could become a threat to me or the family. I was your husband. You were also using my signature on financial documents." Julian looked at her sharply. "I never signed your name." Evelyn picked up the tablet. She touched the screen and turned it toward him. A scanned document appeared. The Cross Foundation, Emergency Housing Allocation, $250,000. At the bottom was Evelyn's signature. Julian looked at it. "That came from accounting. It came from your office. You cannot prove I created it." She moved to the next image, an email from Julian to Owen. "Use her authorization. She does not review foundation reports." Julian's eyes stopped. He read it again. Evelyn watched him. "You sent that from your personal account. It was not about forging anything." "What did you mean by use her authorization?" "I meant use the standing approval." "There was no standing approval." Julian looked toward the window. "You are twisting business language." Evelyn moved to another document. A transfer from the foundation into Lake Mercury Consulting. Another transfer from Lake Mercury into an Atlantic City casino account. A final payment into a private debt service company. Julian's name appeared in the reference line. His breathing changed. Evelyn touched the screen again. A photograph appeared. Julian leaving a private gaming room at 3 a.m. His tie was loose. His face was flushed. Vanessa followed behind him, laughing beneath a white fur coat. Julian stared at the image. "Who took that?" "It does not matter. It matters to me. The $2 million missing from a children's housing fund matters to me." His eyes moved back to her. "I was going to replace it." with what the river project was about to close another round. The project was carrying debt you concealed from investors. Temporary debt. You paid old debt with new debt. That is how development works. No, that is how desperation works. Julian's mouth tightened. You do not understand real estate. I understand numbers. You understand inherited money. The words stayed between them. Gabriel shifted in the front seat. Evelyn did not look away. Julian continued. You sit on a trust your grandfather built. You sign documents and men move millions. You have never had to make payroll with 3 days of cash left. You have never watched a bank decide whether your life deserves another month. Evelyn's voice remained soft. You are right. Julian blinked. The admission disarmed him. She continued. I have never been poor. I have never slept in a cold kitchen. I have never watched my mother count coins before buying food. Her eyes held his. That is why I believed you when you said success meant safety. Julian said nothing. I thought your fear made you ambitious, she continued. I did not understand that you had begun feeding it. I did what I had to do. You stole from children. I moved money. You forged my name. I protected the foundation from delay. You bribed inspectors. Every project in Chicago requires relationships. You paid a man to ignore structural concerns. The concerns were exaggerated. A support beam failed 6 weeks later. No one was hurt, because the building was empty. Julian looked away again. The sedan turned onto a darker street. Steel columns rose beside the road. A train passed above them, shaking water from the tracks. Evelyn lowered the tablet. When did you stop hearing yourself? He looked at her. What is that supposed to mean? You used to be ashamed when you lied. I never lied to you. Vanessa. Julian exhaled. That marriage was already finished. You were sleeping beside me. We had not been close for months. You stopped coming near me because you were afraid I would ask where you had been. That is not true. I could smell her perfume. His eyes flickered. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the tablet. You came home one night with lipstick inside your collar. You walked past me and kissed my forehead. Julian remembered. He had thought she was reading. He had believed she noticed nothing. I stayed awake until morning, she said. You slept beside me as if betrayal were a room only you could enter. Julian leaned forward. Why did you stay? The question escaped before he could soften it. Evelyn looked at him for a long time. Because I remembered you before all of this. Her voice changed. It became quieter, more dangerous because of how much it cost her. I remembered the man who fixed your mother's sink without being asked. I remembered the man who walked 3 blocks in the snow because he saw an old woman drop her groceries. I remembered you sitting on my kitchen floor terrified that your company would fail. She swallowed. I thought fear had buried that man. I believed love could reach him. Julian looked down. The wet fabric of his trousers clung to his knees. You should have confronted me. I tried. When, every time I asked you to come home, every time I asked you to visit Ruth, every time I asked what was happening with the foundation, you never said you knew. I wanted you to tell me. You tested me. I gave you space to be honest. That is a test. Evelyn's face hardened. Then you failed it. The car grew silent. Only the windshield wipers moved. Julian stared at the floor. His voice was lower when he spoke again. What happens now? Evelyn studied him. That depends on what you mean. To the company. The receiver will separate legitimate operations from the fraudulent accounts. Employees who were not involved will remain. You are taking control. Red Saint is protecting its collateral. You mean your family is taking my company. The company stopped being yours when you pledged more than you could repay. Julian looked up. What about the penthouse? It will be sold. The lake house sold. My personal accounts. Funds connected to legitimate income may eventually be released. Eventually. After forensic review, my name is on every article in the city. You wanted people to know your name." He flinched. Evelyn looked down at the tablet. Julian watched her. "What did you give the federal agents' records?" "Which records?" "The foundation accounts. The shell companies. The inspector payments. You turned me in. I stopped hiding you." His face twisted. "You were protecting me for longer than I should have." Julian sat back. The words seemed impossible. "You could have destroyed me months ago." "Yes." "Why did you wait?" Evelyn took a slow breath. "I wanted the divorce completed before the investigation became public. To protect your family. To protect myself." Julian gave a bitter laugh. Finally, an honest answer. She did not react. "The assets you accumulated during the marriage are contaminated by mixed funds," she said. "Some were purchased with company money, some were supported by false invoices, some may be connected to foundation transfers." Julian's smile disappeared. "If I accepted property from you, your attorneys could argue that I benefited from the fraud. If I accepted support, they could examine every payment. If I claimed part of the company, I could be treated as someone who profited from the structure." He stared at her. "That is why you asked for nothing." "Yes." "You did not refuse the money because you were proud." "No. You refused it because you knew what was coming. I refused it because none of it was clean." Julian's throat moved. The title of every newspaper article, every video, every whisper in the restaurant suddenly changed shape in his mind. Evelyn had not walked away empty-handed. She had stepped away from an explosion before it reached her. "You knew I could go to prison. I knew the evidence could lead there, and you sat across from me while I laughed." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "You think that was the moment I chose this?" He said nothing. She leaned closer. "I chose to protect myself the night I found my name forged on a document that stole money from children." Julian looked toward Gabriel. The older man still faced forward. Julian lowered his voice. "If I had behaved differently in that room, would you have stopped this?" Evelyn looked out the window. "No." The answer surprised him. She continued. "The records were already preserved. The receiver was already prepared. The foundation money had to be restored. Then nothing I said mattered. It mattered to me." She turned back. "I wanted to know whether any part of the man I married remained." Julian's mouth went dry. "If you had signed the papers without humiliating me, if you had admitted what you had done, if you had shown concern for the employees or the charity, I would have supported a controlled surrender." "What does that mean?" "Your counsel could have approached investigators before the public filing. The company could have been transferred without officers arriving in the lobby. Your mother could have been warned before reporters found her address." Julian's face changed. "Reporters went to Ruth, yes. When this afternoon..." He looked at his phone. There were missed calls from an unknown number, another from Ruth. He had ignored it during the meeting. "What did she say?" "She asked whether you were safe." Julian closed his eyes. Evelyn watched him. "She did not ask whether the money was safe," she said. His eyes opened. "Do not use my mother against me. I am not the one who left her alone." He leaned toward her. "You think you are better than me because your crimes have lawyers." Gabriel turned again. This time Evelyn did not stop him immediately. Julian looked at the scar along the older man's jaw. Gabriel's voice was quiet. "You do not know enough about her family to accuse her carelessly." Julian met his gaze. "I know exactly what the Marcellis are." "No," Gabriel said. "You know the stories men tell when they want fear to excuse their own greed." Evelyn lifted a hand. Gabriel faced forward. Julian looked at her. "You defend him faster than you ever defended me. He has never asked me to lie for him." Julian sat back. The car slowed at a red light. Outside, a man slept beneath a plastic sheet near a closed storefront. Water gathered along the curb beside him. Julian watched the figure until the light changed. His voice was quieter. "Did you ever love me?" Evelyn looked at him. For the first time since he entered the car, her composure began to crack. Not much. A small breath. A tremor in the fingers holding the tablet. But Julian saw it. "I loved you enough to believe you over the evidence of my own eyes." He swallowed. "I loved you too. You loved what I allowed you to feel. That is not fair. You felt powerful beside me because you believed I was ordinary. You were ordinary to me." The words came out wrong. He heard it immediately. Evelyn looked away. "I mean, you were real." She remained silent. Julian moved closer. "I did not care about your family because I did not know. I cared about you. You cared about a wife who never challenged your place above her. I wanted to give you a life. I had a life. You worked in a coffee shop. I chose it. You could have done anything. So could you." Julian stopped. Evelyn looked back at him. "You could have built something honest. You could have paid the workers before buying another car. You could have called your mother. You could have admitted you were afraid." Her voice softened. "You could have come home." Julian's face tightened. "I did come home." "No. You came back to a building where I happened to live." The sedan entered a quieter neighborhood. The towers of downtown receded behind them. Julian recognized the elevated tracks, the older brick buildings, and the narrow storefronts. "Where are we going?" "I am going to my hotel." "And me?" "You are getting out." His head turned sharply. "No." Evelyn reached into the leather bag beside her. She removed a transit card and a small brass key. Julian stared at them. "What is that?" "The card has enough value to get you to Bridgeport." "I am not taking a train. You cannot pay for a car." His face burned. She held out the card. He did not take it. "What is the key?" "Your mother's building." Julian looked at the worn brass. "I do not live there. You do not live at the penthouse either." His voice sharpened. "You cannot leave me on the street." "I am not. You are dropping me at a train station. You have somewhere to go. She does not want me there." Evelyn's expression changed. "She has wanted you there for years." Julian stared at her. "You do not know that. I speak to her every Sunday." The words entered him slowly. "What she called me after the wedding. At first she wanted to ask what you liked for your birthday. Then she began calling because you stopped answering." Julian looked down at the key. "You visited her." "Yes." "How often?" "Enough to know the kitchen window still leaks." His jaw worked. "You went behind my back. She was lonely. She judged me. She missed you." Julian looked toward the front of the car. "Did you tell her who you were?" "No." "Why not?" "Because she loved Evelyn Hart." The sedan pulled toward the curb. A train station entrance stood beneath a line of steel tracks. White lights shone down on wet concrete. A few people hurried through the rain with their heads lowered. The car stopped. Julian did not move. Evelyn placed the transit card and key on the seat between them. He looked at her. "Call the receiver." "No." "Tell them to delay the sale." "No." "Give me 48 hours." "No." His voice cracked. "I can fix this. You have spent years using that sentence to delay consequences. I can pay the foundation back." "With whose money?" He had no answer. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached toward the door control. Julian grabbed her wrist. Gabriel turned instantly. A black pistol appeared in his hand, held low against his leg. Julian froze. Evelyn did not flinch. She looked down at his hand. Let go. He released her. Gabriel kept the weapon visible for another second, then lowered it. Julian's breathing became unsteady. This is who you are. Evelyn rubbed her wrist. No. This is what follows me because of who my family was. She pressed the door control. The lock released. Cold air entered through the seal. Julian stared at her. Was any of it real? Evelyn looked toward the open door. The coffee shop was real. He waited. The apartment was real. Sunday mornings with your mother were real. The night I held you on the kitchen floor was real. Her eyes met his. My love was real. Julian's voice dropped. And now love does not change the evidence. He looked at the card, then at the key. You will regret this. Evelyn's face grew still. I already regret more than you understand. Julian picked up the transit card. The brass key followed. He stepped out into the rain. Before closing the door, he turned back. Evelyn sat beneath the soft interior light, one hand resting over the wrist he had grabbed. Evelyn. She waited. I did not kill the man you loved. Her eyes shone. No. She looked directly at him. You abandoned him every time being cruel made you feel powerful. Julian stood motionless. Evelyn pressed the button. The door began to close. At the last second, Julian looked toward the front passenger seat. Gabriel had turned slightly toward the window. The interior light caught the silver scar along his jaw. Julian had seen that scar before. Not in the office, not outside the coffee shop, in an old photograph hidden in Ruth's apartment. His father stood beside a black car, one hand on the shoulder of a younger man whose face carried a fresh wound from ear to jaw. Julian stepped closer. Who are you? Gabriel looked at him through the narrowing space. His expression changed for the first time. Not fear. Recognition. The door sealed shut. The sedan moved into traffic. Julian stood beneath the elevated tracks with the transit card in one hand and his mother's key in the other. The black car disappeared behind a curtain of rain. Above him, a train thundered through the night. Julian looked down at the key. Then he walked toward the station. 6 months later, Julian Cross stood beneath fluorescent lights with a coffee pot in one hand and a gray rag tucked into the back pocket of his black work pants. The diner was called Roosevelt Grill, though there was nothing presidential about it. It sat near an industrial road in Cicero between a tire shop and a warehouse that never seemed to close. Trucks passed through the intersection all night. Their headlights swept across the windows, briefly illuminating rows of red vinyl booths before disappearing into the darkness. At 2 a.m, the diner belonged to delivery drivers, nurses ending late shifts, factory workers beginning early ones, and people who did not want to go home. Julian had become one of them. A plastic badge rested above his shirt pocket. Julian. No last name, no company logo, no gold initials sewn into the cuff. The manager had asked whether he wanted the badge to say Jules. Julian had said no. He had spent too much of his life shortening the truth whenever it embarrassed him. A truck driver raised an empty cup from booth 7. Coffee. Julian carried the pot over. The man did not look up from his phone. Julian filled the cup. Anything else, ketchup? Julian glanced at the half-empty bottle beside the napkin holder. There is some right there. The man finally looked up. Then why did I have to ask 6 months earlier? Julian would have answered with a stare sharp enough to make the man regret speaking. Now he picked up the bottle, wiped the cap, and placed it closer to the man's hand. There you go. The driver returned to his phone. Julian walked back behind the counter. His manager, Kyle Mason, stood beside the kitchen window counting receipts. Kyle was 21 years old and wore a baseball cap backward. He had never heard of Cross Urban Development before Julian applied for work. During the interview, Kyle had examined the empty spaces on Julian's application. You used to work in real estate? Yes. What did you do? I owned a development company. Kyle had laughed because he thought Julian was joking. Julian had not corrected him. The federal investigation moved faster once Evelyn provided the records. Cross Urban Development survived, but Julian did not remain part of it. The receiver separated viable projects from the shell companies. Employees who had no connection to the fraud kept their jobs. Several executives resigned. Owen Price entered a cooperation agreement and testified about the false reports. The Cross Foundation received every missing dollar back through a combination of seized assets and funds advanced by Red Saint Capital. Julian received no praise for the restoration. He had not earned any. His attorneys negotiated a plea after the prosecutors showed them the evidence. Forged approvals, false invoices, illegal payments, misuse of charitable money, messages in which Julian told Owen to move funds before auditors arrived. He pleaded guilty to financial fraud, falsification of records, and unlawful use of charitable assets. The judge considered the amount returned Julian's cooperation and the fact that no one had been physically injured by the construction violations. He avoided a long prison sentence. Instead, he received 5 years of probation, financial restrictions, community service, and a restitution order that would follow him for years. He was barred from managing investment funds, directing a public charity, or working in real estate development. His passport was surrendered. His accounts remained under supervision. Every month he met a probation officer who asked whether he had changed jobs, opened accounts, traveled outside Illinois, or contacted anyone connected to the investigation. The first time Julian entered Roosevelt Grill wearing a plain black shirt, he felt certain someone would recognize him. No one did. Without the suit, the car, and the people opening doors, he was simply a tired man in his 30s asking whether customers wanted fries. The invisibility humiliated him at first. Then it frightened him. Eventually, it became quiet. "Table 3 needs the check," Kyle said. Julian took the printed receipt. A couple sat in the booth near the window. They appeared to be in their 60s. The woman had fallen asleep against the man's shoulder. Julian placed the check near the edge of the table. The man whispered, "Thank you." Julian nodded and walked away without waking her. He had begun noticing small things. People who counted coins before ordering. Parents who split one plate between 2 children. Workers who drank coffee slowly because the diner was warmer than the room waiting for them elsewhere. He saw the lives he had trained himself not to see. At the end of his shift, Julian changed in the storage room. He folded his work shirt and placed it inside a narrow locker. His coat came from a discount store. His shoes had thick rubber soles. The Italian loafers were gone. So were the suits, the watches, the art, and the furniture from the penthouse. Most had been sold. Some had turned out to belong to the company. The gold cufflinks carrying Julian's initials were purchased with foundation funds. He learned that during an inventory hearing. He had not remembered which account paid for them. That was part of the problem. Outside, the sky had begun to lighten. Cold wind moved between the warehouses. Julian walked toward the bus stop. He still carried the brass key Evelyn had given him. For 6 months, it remained in the smallest pocket of his wallet. He took it out sometimes and held it beneath the light. He never used it. Ruth left messages. At first, she called every day, then once a week. Her voice never sounded angry. That made it harder. "I made soup. I saw the court hearing. You do not have to explain anything over the phone. Call when you are ready." Julian deleted none of the messages. He answered none of them. He told himself he was protecting her from reporters. The reporters had already left. He told himself she deserved peace. The truth was simpler. He did not know how to stand in front of his mother without the life he had used to prove leaving her was justified. The bus arrived. Julian climbed aboard and sat near the back. He could have returned to the room he rented above a bowling alley. The room contained a bed, 1 chair, and a window facing an alley. Instead, he remained seated when the bus passed his usual stop. He rode east. The neighborhoods changed gradually. Warehouses gave way to brick houses, narrow storefronts, old churches, and streets he knew before he knew the skyline. Bridgeport looked smaller than he remembered, or perhaps he had spent too many years pretending it was beneath him. He stepped off near the corner where his mother once bought groceries. The market had become a pharmacy. The laundromat was still there. A mural covered the wall beside the alley. It showed workers raising steel beams above the city. Julian stood before it for several minutes. Then he walked toward Ruth's building. The front steps had been repaired. The old buzzer panel was replaced. He took the brass key from his wallet. It fit the outside door. The stairwell smelled of boiled cabbage dust and old paint. His mother lived on the 3rd floor. Julian climbed slowly. At the top, he stopped outside apartment 3B. He raised his hand to knock. The door opened before he touched it. Ruth Cross stood in the doorway wearing a faded blue robe. Her hair was more silver than he remembered. She looked at him without speaking. Julian had rehearsed several apologies on the bus. None survived her face. "I did not know if the key still worked," he said. Ruth glanced at his hand. It worked. He nodded. She waited. Julian looked past her into the apartment. The furniture was the same. The narrow couch, the crocheted blanket, the wooden table beside the window. A photograph of him at 12 years old stood on the shelf. He had forgotten the red sweater he wore. Ruth stepped aside. "You are letting the heat out." Julian entered. She closed the door. For a moment they stood together in the small living room. Ruth looked at his coat, his worn shoes, and the shadows beneath his eyes. Julian expected pity. He saw only concern. "Have you eaten?" "I am not hungry." That was not the question. She walked into the kitchen. Julian followed. A pot rested on the stove. Ruth lifted the lid. Steam filled the room. "Chicken soup," she said. "You used to like it." "I still do." She placed a bowl on the table. Julian sat. His knees nearly touched the underside just as they had when he was a teenager. Ruth set down a spoon. She did not ask about the trial. She did not ask about Evelyn. She did not ask how much money remained. Julian took one spoonful. The taste brought back winters he had spent trying to forget. His mother warming bread on the radiator. His father sleeping on the couch. Rain leaking through the kitchen window. Julian placed the spoon down. "I am sorry." Ruth stood near the stove with her back to him. "For which thing?" He looked at the soup. "For not coming." She turned. "You are here. I should have come years ago." "Yes." The answer was gentle. It hurt more than anger. Julian looked at her. "I was ashamed of me." He could have lied. He did not. "Yes." Ruth nodded slowly. "I know." His eyes burned. "I thought if I came back it meant I had failed." "You failed without coming back." Julian lowered his head. Ruth sat across from him. "You believed this place made you small." "It did." "No. You were a child here. Children are small." He looked up. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You did not have to punish everyone who remembered you before the suit." Julian's throat tightened. "I sold the house." Ruth's expression did not change. "I know. I used it for the first company." "I know. I told you the bank made the decision. You signed the papers." He pulled his hand away. "I thought I could buy you a better one. But you did not." "No." Ruth looked toward the window. Evelyn came when the reporters did. Julian became still. "What did she say?" "She said none of this was my fault. She should not have involved you. She did not. You did." He looked down. Ruth continued. "She had groceries brought. She changed the lock. She sat at this table until the men outside left." Julian's voice lowered. "Did she tell you her real name?" "Yes." "When?" 3 years ago." He stared at her. "You knew." She asked me not to tell you. And you agreed? Ruth's eyes sharpened. It was not my secret. Julian stood. The chair scraped against the floor. Everyone knew except me. No. Ruth remained seated. Most people did not know. I knew because she trusted me. She was my wife. She wanted to trust you. Julian looked toward the living room. A framed photograph stood near the television. It showed Ruth and Evelyn together in the kitchen. Evelyn wore the same cream sweater from the divorce meeting. Flour marked one cheek. Ruth stood beside her holding a pie. Julian picked up the photograph. When was this last Christmas? I was in New York. You said you had meetings. He had spent Christmas Eve with Vanessa in a hotel overlooking Central Park. He set the photograph down. Ruth watched him. She never spoke badly about you. She destroyed my life. Ruth's expression hardened. No. Julian turned. She took the company. You lost it. You do not understand. I understand that you used money meant for children. He stared at her. Ruth's voice shook. I understand that men came to my door asking whether I knew my son had forged his wife's name. Julian looked away. I understand that Evelyn stood outside this apartment in the cold because she did not want me to hear the things reporters were shouting. Ruth rose. She did not destroy your life, Julian. She stopped holding up the walls. The kitchen became silent. Julian leaned against the counter. His eyes moved toward the faucet. A drop of water gathered at the base, then slid into the sink. It still leaks, he said. Ruth followed his gaze. You fixed it once. I did not fix it properly. He opened the cabinet beneath the sink. An old metal toolbox rested inside. Julian placed it on the floor. Ruth watched him remove his coat and roll up his sleeves. He knelt beneath the sink. The pipe was rusted near the joint. His father had shown him how to replace one when he was 9. Julian had forgotten the sound of Thomas Cross's voice until that moment. Not the angry voice. Another one. Patient. Hold the wrench steady. Do not force the thread. Julian closed his eyes. Do you still have the photographs of Dad? Ruth stood very still. Some. I want to see them. She left the kitchen. Julian loosened the pipe. A few minutes later, Ruth returned carrying a cardboard box. She placed it on the table. After the faucet stopped leaking, Julian washed his hands and opened the box. Inside were school photographs, old receipts, Christmas cards, and pictures he had not seen in decades. Thomas Cross appeared in several. He was broad-shouldered with dark hair and tired eyes. In one photograph, he stood beside a black car with his hand on the shoulder of a younger man. The younger man had a bandage along his jaw. Julian lifted the image. This is him. Ruth looked over his shoulder. Gabriel Moretti. Julian turned. You know Gabriel. Your father worked with him. For Marcelli, Ruth sat beside him. Your father drove for Carlo Marcelli. Julian looked back at the photograph. You told me he worked in warehouses. He did that too. Why did you never tell me? Because after he disappeared, I wanted that world gone from this house. Julian studied his father's face. What happened to him? Ruth folded her hands. He made mistakes. He drank. He lied. But not every story you told about him was true. I remember him leaving. He left because men were looking for him. Which men? Ruth shook her head. I do not know all of it. Julian looked again at Gabriel's scar. The photograph trembled slightly in his hand. 3 nights later, Julian returned to Roosevelt Grill for his evening shift. At midnight, the diner was nearly empty. Rain tapped against the windows. Julian carried a plate of eggs to a man seated in booth 6. He placed it down. Ketchup is on the table. The man looked up. Dominic Hale removed his glasses. He appeared older than he had in the conference room. His hair had thinned. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. Julian stood frozen. Dominic looked at the plate. I did not order eggs. Julian glanced at the ticket. You are right. He picked it up. Dominic spoke before he could leave. Sit down. I am working. I spoke to your manager. Julian looked toward the counter. Kyle raised one hand. Dominic had placed several bills beside the register. Julian set the plate on an empty table and sat across from him. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Dominic opened a black briefcase. Julian watched him. You look disappointed. Dominic glanced up. About what? That I am not in prison. I work to keep you out. You work to keep yourself out. Yes. The honesty surprised Julian. Dominic folded his hands. I cooperated because I did not want to lose the rest of my life protecting choices I warned you not to make. You signed the reports. I trusted the summaries your office provided. You also ignored things. Dominic nodded. I did. Julian waited for an excuse. None came. Dominic looked toward the rain outside. I lost my partnership. Julian felt no satisfaction. Why are you here? Dominic removed a thick envelope from the briefcase. A red wax seal marked the front. The Marcelli crest. Julian did not touch it. What does she want? She wants you to read what is inside. Did she come with you? No. Does she know where I work? Yes. Julian looked toward the window. No black sedan waited outside. Dominic pushed the envelope closer. Julian broke the seal. Inside was a legal deed. He read the address. The row house in Bridgeport. The house where he had grown up. His hands tightened around the paper. This was sold. It was. Who owns it? Read the final page. Julian turned the pages. His name appeared beneath the property description. Julian Thomas Cross. He looked at Dominic. This is mine. The title is in your name. How Evelyn purchased the property after the bank sale. She paid the taxes and financed the renovation. Julian stared at the deed. Why continue reading? The document contained restrictions. The house could not be sold. It could not be pledged as collateral. It could not be transferred into a company. Ruth held the right to live there for the rest of her life. Julian could occupy the house, maintain it, and pass it to a direct family member. Nothing more. He could not turn it into money. Dominic handed him a second page, a letter written in Evelyn's hand. Julian, you spent your life believing home was evidence of failure. You ran from every room that remembered you before people knew your name. The house is not an investment. It cannot rescue a company, secure a loan, impress a stranger, or prove that you won. Your mother may live there for the rest of her life. You may live there if she allows it. You cannot sell it. You cannot borrow against it. You cannot use it to become Julian Cross again. You may only use it to become Julian. What you do with that opportunity belongs to you. Evelyn. Julian read the letter twice. His eyes blurred. He placed it on the table. She gave me the house. Dominic shook his head. She gave your mother security. Julian looked at him. And me. A door. The diner lights hummed above them. Julian pressed both hands against the deed. Why would she do this? Dominic looked tired. Because destroying you was never her purpose. It looked like it. She refused to protect you from consequences. That is not the same as wanting you dead. Julian lowered his voice. Did she ask about me? Dominic hesitated. Yes. What did she ask? Whether you were working. That is all? She asked whether you had visited Ruth. Julian looked toward the counter. Kyle poured coffee for a customer. Tell her I did. I already did. Julian's face tightened. You speak to her often. I represent several Marcelli entities now. The old bitterness returned. So this visit is business. Partly. Dominic reached into the briefcase again. He removed a thin folder marked with the red saint symbol. Julian looked at it. What is that, your father's file? Julian did not move. Dominic opened the folder. Thomas Cross worked for Carlo Marcelli for 11 years. He drove vehicles, kept warehouse records, and managed cash deliveries. My mother told me. She probably did not know the rest. Dominic placed an old photograph on the table. It was the same image Julian had seen at Ruth's apartment. Thomas beside the black car. Gabriel with the fresh wound along his jaw. 27 years ago, one of Carlo's senior men began stealing from the family's shipping accounts, Dominic said. Thomas found the missing payments. Julian listened without blinking. The man responsible discovered Thomas had copied the records. He planned to kill him and Gabriel before they could reach Carlo. Julian looked at the scar in the photograph. What happened? Thomas warned Gabriel. During the confrontation, Gabriel was cut. Thomas drove him through a warehouse gate while men fired at the car. Julian looked at Dominic. My father saved him. Yes. And Carlo recovered the records. The man responsible disappeared from the organization. Julian did not ask what disappeared meant. Dominic continued. Carlo offered Thomas a position and enough money to leave Bridgeport. He refused. He accepted part of it. Julian's mouth tightened. So he had money while my mother counted coins. No. Dominic slid a trust document across the table. He placed it here. Red Saint Capital. Julian read the name. The room seemed to narrow around him. Dominic pointed toward the first page. Thomas created a private trust for you. Julian looked up. That is impossible. He believed sudden money would damage you. He had seen what fear and power did to men in the Marcelli organization. My father was drunk most nights. He became worse after the trust was created. Why guilt? Fear. Perhaps he believed leaving would keep danger away from you. Julian pushed the document away. He abandoned us. Yes. Dominic did not soften it. He also tried to leave you something better than his habits. Julian looked back at the pages. What were the terms you would gain control at 40 if the trustee determined you had built an honest life? The trustee could intervene earlier if your conduct placed the trust at serious risk, or if you reached complete financial collapse. Julian frowned. I borrowed from Red Saint. Yes. The money that saved Cross Urban Development came from this trust. A portion of it. Julian stared at the table. Evelyn had authorized $12 million. She had not only used her family's company. She had used the structure his father created for him. I borrowed against my own inheritance. Dominic nodded. You also pledged assets built through that loan and attempted to move fraudulent funds through related accounts. Julian's face went pale. When Evelyn called the loan, she took my inheritance. No. Dominic turned to another page. She protected it. He explained that Evelyn discovered Thomas's trust while reviewing the historical ownership records of Red Saint Capital. Carlo had never told her Julian was the beneficiary. The trust had been managed through independent counsel after Thomas disappeared. Once Evelyn understood the connection, she moved the remaining balance into a protected structure. Part of the trust funded restitution for victims tied directly to Julian's conduct. The rest remained locked. Julian could not access it. Not at 40. Not automatically. A panel of trustees would review his conduct work restitution payments and compliance with probation. Years might pass before they made a decision. They might never release control to him. Julian looked at Dominic. She used my father's money to pay what I stole. She used funds legally designated to protect you from your own collapse. Julian's eyes filled. Did she know him? She met him once, when she was a child. Thomas visited Carlo's house before he disappeared. Dominic removed one final paper. It was a copy of a note Thomas had written to Carlo. Julian recognized none of the handwriting. He read slowly. Carlo, my son is going to spend his life running from where he came from. He thinks hunger is the worst thing a man can feel. It is not. The worst thing is becoming someone who cannot feel anything when another person is hungry. Do not give him the money until he understands the difference. If I am not there to teach him, let the trust refuse him until life does. Thomas. Julian lowered the page. A tear struck the paper. He wiped it away quickly. Dominic closed the folder. Gabriel told Evelyn what your father said the last time they spoke. Julian waited. Dominic's voice softened. Thomas said, "Home is not the same as failure." The kitchen bell rang. Kyle called Julian's name. Julian did not answer. Dominic stood and buttoned his coat. "Does Evelyn hate me?" Julian asked. Dominic looked down at him. "No." Julian's throat tightened. "Does she forgive me?" "That is not a question you have earned the right to ask her yet." Dominic picked up his briefcase. Julian looked at the deed. "Will I see her again?" Dominic paused beside the booth. "I do not know." He walked toward the exit. At the door, he turned. "Julian." Julian looked up. "She saved what she could without saving the man you pretended to be." The bell above the diner door rang. Dominic disappeared into the rain. Julian sat alone. The deed rested beneath one hand. His father's letter rested beneath the other. Kyle called again. "Julian, table 4 needs coffee." Julian folded the papers carefully and returned them to the envelope. He stood. At table 4, an elderly man sat with both hands wrapped around an empty cup. Julian filled it. The man looked up. "Long night?" Julian considered the question. "Yes." The man nodded toward the envelope beneath Julian's arm. "Bad news." Julian looked at the red seal. "No." He placed the coffee pot back on the tray. "Not bad." After his shift, Julian returned to Bridgeport. He did not take the bus to Ruth's apartment. He walked 3 additional blocks to the row house. The building stood between 2 narrow homes beneath an old maple tree. Fresh brick framed the lower windows. The porch had been repaired. Warm light glowed behind the curtains. Julian climbed the steps carrying 1 duffel bag. Everything he owned fit inside it. 2 shirts, 1 pair of work pants, a framed photograph from Ruth's apartment, his probation documents, the deed. He stood at the door. Before he could knock, Ruth opened it. She looked at the bag. "Is that everything?" Julian glanced down the quiet street. Then he looked at the house. "It is everything I actually own." Ruth stepped aside. He entered. The living room had been restored but not transformed. The old wooden floor remained. The mantel had been repaired. Family photographs stood beneath a warm lamp. One showed Julian as a boy between Ruth and Thomas. Another showed Julian and Evelyn outside the small church on their wedding day. Julian touched the edge of the frame. Ruth watched him. "I can put that one away." "No." He left it where it was. A drop of water sounded from the kitchen. Julian looked toward it. Ruth sighed. "The upstairs pipe started leaking yesterday." Julian placed his bag near the stairs. "Where is the toolbox?" "Under the sink." He removed his coat and rolled up his sleeves. Outside, at the far end of the street, a black sedan waited beneath the bare branches of a tree. Evelyn sat in the back seat. The final divorce decree rested inside a folder beside her. Her signature was already there. Julian's had been added through counsel. Only the judge's approval remained. Gabriel sat in front. He looked at the light in the row house. He came home. Evelyn watched Julian's shadow move across the kitchen window. "Yes. Do you want me to tell him you are here?" Her hand rested on the closed folder. "No." Gabriel waited. Evelyn looked down at her wedding ring. She no longer wore it, but she carried it inside a small pocket of her purse. The driver asked whether they should remain. Evelyn looked toward the house one final time. Through the window, Julian knelt beneath the kitchen sink while Ruth stood beside him holding a flashlight. He tightened the damaged pipe. Water stopped falling. Ruth said something Evelyn could not hear. Julian looked up and smiled. It was a small smile. Tired, unpracticed. Nothing like the smile he used for cameras. Evelyn turned away from the window. "Take me to the airport." The sedan moved from the curb. Inside the house, Julian finished securing the pipe. Ruth tested the faucet. No water leaked beneath it. "You fixed it," she said. Julian placed the wrench inside the toolbox. For now. He stood and washed his hands. Morning light entered through the kitchen window, touching the worn table, the old photographs, and the brass key he had placed beside the sink. Julian looked out at the empty street. For one moment he thought he saw the dark shape of a car turning at the corner. Then it was gone. Ruth poured 2 cups of coffee. Julian sat across from her. He wrapped both hands around the warm cup. There were debts he still had to pay. People he still had to face. Apologies that might never be accepted. The house did not erase any of it. It simply gave him a place where he could no longer hide behind the man he had invented. Ruth pushed a plate of toast toward him. "You start work tonight?" "Yes." "You should sleep." "I will." Julian looked at the photograph of Thomas on the mantel, then at the wedding photograph beside it. He did not know whether Evelyn would ever speak to him again. He did not know whether the trustees would one day release his father's money. For the first time, he understood that neither question could be answered by force. He lifted the coffee to his lips. Outside, Chicago woke beneath a pale winter sky. Inside, Julian Cross sat in the house he once believed was too small for him. He did not feel powerful. He did not feel forgiven. He felt present. For that morning, it was enough.